know why it is, but we tend to need to be reminded of some of the commitments that we have made in the past. And that's why I think sometimes people will renew their vows in marriage. At 25 years or at 50 years, they may even have an entire service. I've seen that happen. I also recall when I was a child, I don't know if they still do that, but when I was a child, we would turn to the flag behind me and we would say the Pledge of Allegiance. And we said it every day. And you would think, well, I pledged allegiance once. That should be enough, right? Well, the thing is, we forget, don't we? We forget about those things that we committed to, and then we end up not doing those things that we said that we would do. Jesus is restoring us, just like he did Peter way back when, as we've been seeing for the last 4 weeks. If you recall, it began with an invitation. Jesus initiated the relationship by blessing Peter once again and reminding him of blessings that he had received earlier on. Then he invited Peter to come and dine, have fellowship with me. And then he restored him. If you recall, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. So Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? And that restoration is about to become complete with the commissioning. And the commissioning also harkens back to a prior time in Peter's life. So as you think about how you can be renewed in your relationship with God, don't forget about the past. This isn't about starting afresh and forgetting everything that ever happened before. This is a time of renewal and refreshing and recommitting. Just like every day you pledged allegiance to a flag as a little child, even now you can come back to Jesus Christ. Not to say that, well, I wasn't saved or I wasn't walking with God, but now I am standing firm in a new relationship with him. And by God's grace, that new relationship will continue every day from here on out until I'm no longer standing on my 2 feet or breathing with these lungs. Let's take a look at what Jesus told to Peter. Now, when Jesus had spoken this, he said to Peter, follow me. And this reminded me of way back in Matthew 4, verses 19 and 20, where Jesus first met Peter. He said to him, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Then immediately they left their nets and followed him. If you recall that story, it was very similar to the one that we just experienced in John 21. Jesus had called out to them and asked them, did you catch any fish? Peter said, no, I've been fishing all night long. We haven't caught anything. And Jesus said, well, throw it on the other side of the boat. And then, after they had caught so many fish, in fact, it was so many fish that the net started to break and they had to call in their friends. At that point, Jesus said, follow me. So I'd like to invite you to think about, when was the first time that you experienced Jesus in your life? How many years ago was it? Can you remember that far back? Was it in Sunday school one time when a story came to life and your Sunday school teacher asked you, would you like Jesus to be your Lord? You can ask him right now. And you did. Maybe it was another time. But think back to that. Because what God is doing in your life right now echoes what happened in the prior life, as you were walking with him earlier. Now, it is possible that somebody in this room has been coming to church every Sunday for years and years and years, but never once heard that call. But now is the time. So if you've never experienced the call of Christ in your life, don't worry about it. You can still hear it now. But if you have experienced it in the past, don't ignore it now. Don't think that just because you pledged allegiance in the past, you have no right to pledge allegiance today. You do. Peter got distracted, though, just as we do. Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at supper and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, but Lord, what about this man? We do get distracted that way, don't we? We start looking at other people and thinking, why are they doing such and such? They really shouldn't be, back in when I was young, they shouldn't be going to movies, or they shouldn't be going to a baseball game on a Sunday, or they shouldn't be whatever. And that's really not what our calling is. Our calling is not to look at other people and seeing what their walk with God is like. Our responsibility is to respond to Jesus when he calls us. And he says, follow me. But Peter got distracted, just as you and I do. So Jesus brought the focus back for him. And he said, if I will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Now each one of us, as we follow after Christ, it's going to look a little bit different. There's a song that I heard not too long ago on WDUX, which talked about, I think it was the class of 1957, and where all the different people had gone. They all had the same experiences growing up, and they had all graduated from the same school, but one went into the military, one became a barber, another became a doctor, yet another one was working at the grocery store. Each person is doing something unique. Each one of us is gifted to do unique things. And our responsibility is to do those things that God's gifted us to do. So some of us are preachers. Some of us can teach Sunday school, or perhaps, Lord willing, someday we'll be able to have a youth group that somebody can teach. Other people are really gifted at just sending letters and cards and encouraging people. Still others, they just are amazing in the kitchen. All of these things are necessary for the body of Christ to function. And there isn't any one that has greater value than another. We all have a purpose here in this church. And if somebody else is really good at one thing, should not discourage you to do the thing that you are called to do. We are each called to follow Jesus Christ. In Matthew 10, verses 37 and 38, Jesus says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. I believe what Jesus is saying is, he wants to be the hub of our lives. Everything else becomes secondary. There's spokes in the wheel, but Jesus wants to be the hub. Everything else has to be subordinate to him. If we allow something else to take the place of him in our lives, things become skewed. God might be calling you just to be faithful in church every Sunday, but you may have a spouse that doesn't like that. But you have to decide, what are you going to do? And that's just one example. There are times when we have to decide what is more important to us. Are you going to obey God, or are you going to please the people around you? And the answer, I pray, is that you're going to choose God every time. Now, when Jesus said, what does it matter if I let him remain till I come? That, of course, caused confusion. The saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? Now, the reason that there was confusion about that is because, well, John, the disciple, had trouble dying. The other apostles, they could die pretty easily. They could have their heads cut off, or they could be stabbed, they could be crucified. John was pretty resilient. They tried to kill him. They wanted to give him an especially bad death by boiling him in hot oil. But he had a Shadrach experience. You know who Shadrach is. Shadrach was a man in the Old Testament who was thrown into a fiery furnace, and he came out completely unscathed. His clothes weren't singed, his hair didn't smell. He was perfect, as if he had never gone into the fire. And that's what happened to John the Apostle. They ended up putting him out in exile on an island where he could not spread the gospel of Jesus Christ any longer. But he could still write letters, and he could still have visions. And it was on that island that he wrote this gospel. So he could not be silenced. But by the time he wrote this, he was in his 90s. And when you consider how the lifespans were back then, he must have looked a little bit like Methuselah. And people had this idea that he never was going to die. And he wanted to set people straight because he didn't want them to lose faith. If, in fact, he did die, which he did, then people would say Jesus' word did not come true. So the importance of this was clear from a personal standpoint for him. From our standpoint, I would like to just share some things about our commission. First of all, we are not exempt from the commission of Jesus Christ. When he told Peter, "You follow me," he's actually telling you and me, "Follow me." In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, he says, "You shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem and in all Judea and in Samaria and to the end of the earth." So that's the commission. We are now at the ends of the earth when you look at Jerusalem's perspective. But that doesn't mean that the commission stops. Even here in Royalton, we should be sharing the gospel of Christ. We need to be proclaiming it. We need to be inviting people into the church, and if they won't come to the church, we need to go out to them. We need to somehow get the message of God's love out to those people around us so that they also can respond to it, have their lives changed, and they can be witnesses. Secondly, the path that Jesus is calling us on is not new. Remember, it has been, 2,000 years since Jesus was born? Since then, there have been generation after generation of people who followed after Christ. And their path took them all over the world. Some as missionaries, some as merchants, but everywhere they went, they shared the gospel of Christ. In Hebrews 12:1, we are encouraged. "Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses," the people that have gone on before us, whether in the Bible or whether in history, "let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." So this is not a new thing that we are called to. This is something that has a historical basis. We are simply carrying the torch